Blessings, good evening. Today is the new moon, holy day in Buddhism, and they call it Dhamma Savana Day. As we just chanted in the Mangala Sutta, Dhamma Savana means discussing the Dhamma, sharing the Dhamma, discussing the Dhamma, teachings. It's a blessing. It's a blessing for those who take part, the ones asking questions, answering questions, furthering or deepening our understanding of the Dhamma. So it's a Tuesday night as well, so we have some questions have come in. First one. Dear Luang Por, I wish you well and thanks for the teachings. I am keeping my 5 precepts and practicing meditation regularly. Recently I had a disagreement with one of my Dharma friends who argued that as long as you don't get drunk, consuming alcohol, you are not breaking the 5th precept. However, I disagreed strongly, since drinking is a form of indulgence and has the potential of making someone break the other precepts. Can we get your view on this? Thank you. Well, part of the problem is with intoxicants like alcohol, various drugs, is that they're intoxicating. And that you have to maybe ask the experts and read up, but the intoxication begins almost immediately, as soon as you imbibe a little bit of alcohol. But we may not detect that, so we often argue, oh, well, I'm not drunk, I'm not intoxicated, I'll just drink recreational drinking for the taste or for social reasons. But really the effect on body and mind is fairly quick. There's other associated things, you may be slower to get drunk than the next person, and that's true. Different people will cope with alcohol, or the effect of alcohol on one person is not quite as quick or as strong as on another. But you're also in an environment where other people are drinking, I assume, if you're in that situation where you're drinking. So other people are also maybe getting intoxicated, and one intoxicated person has an influence on another one. So there's these different factors to the drinking thing. Often we're attached to the pleasure, the relaxation of drinking. The initial pleasure seems to lighten the load on the mind. We relax, we joke, we can feel a bit emboldened. We often enjoy that. But the whole point of intoxication is that you quickly lose some of your mindfulness and some of your refined awareness of what is wholesome or unwholesome, the intentions and the thought patterns coming up in your mind. You're less aware. So even though you might feel lightheaded, relaxed, happy, which is desirable, pleasurable, you can also make mistakes, and like you say, you can break other precepts much more easily under the influence of alcohol. Physically also, it starts to have an effect on your body. So, the Buddha, I think, and wise people, meditators since the Buddha, all notice this, that it's very hard to draw a line, isn't it? You can say, well, I just have one drink and it doesn't bother me too much. It's not going to affect me, so why not? But one drink can easily lead to a second or a third drink. It can be a slippery slope downwards in both your mental states, your speech, your actions. It's quite hard to draw the line. Once you're in that situation where you're drinking, it's quite hard to say no again. If someone offers you a drink or you see the alcohol, you're tempted. So, as a good practice, the Buddha encouraged us, if you're intent on training your mind to abandon all unwholesome mental states, well, you might as well keep yourself in the best position, the best physical and mental health to do that, and that means avoiding intoxicants. Another way to understand this is simply meditate regularly, develop mindfulness, reflect on your mental behavior, understand karma from that as well, good and what is wholesome karma, unwholesome karma. Understand the different intentions that rise in your mind. See the results that come from intentional thought, intentional speech, intentional action. And then go off and drink, maybe as an experiment, and notice as your mindfulness improves and your insight improves, you'll notice quickly what alcohol does to your system, to your mind and body. And they're just not really compatible. Often people have this way of looking at it is that, the Buddha is some kind of killjoy, or the monk or the teacher, the Buddhist teacher who says don't drink is some kind of killjoy, blames the Buddha or the teacher. But the Buddha is equanimous towards beings, so if you choose to drink, well, that's your choice. The Buddha is not going to punish you, and there's no one going to punish you if you drink. And maybe the state will punish you if you drink and then act in antisocial ways or dangerous ways, whatever. But the Buddha or religious teachers, monks and nuns are not going to punish you. It's a choice thing. You have the choice. But the Buddha is pointing out the dangers, the risks, the drawbacks and disadvantages of alcohol in this case, for our benefit, out of compassion. But the choice is yours. Because some people, they think, they have to give up alcohol to keep the Buddha happy, or to keep their Buddhist friends happy, or keep the teacher or the monk happy, for example. Well, it's nothing like that. You're doing it for yourself, because your aim is to improve your own qualities of mind, and your own state of mind, your own karma. You're doing it for yourself. It will also benefit others, because the more sober and mindful we are, other people around us are going to be safer and protected by that. But nevertheless, it's number one, it's for ourselves. And the Buddhist teachings are for helping us improve as human beings, to be happier and create the right causes and conditions to be peaceful, happy, have a more wholesome mind, and all the fruits and the benefits that come with that. So bear that in mind if you're wrestling with the thought, should I drink or not? It's your own choice, but it's for your own benefit if you can quit. And it's very difficult to drink and just drink a little, if we're honest. So the Buddha was just encouraging us just to quit. If you quit something, just quit. If you're still drinking a little bit, it's too easy to slip back into intoxication. Next question. Dear Luang Por, thank you for the teachings. I overheard someone mention that if there is a rebirth and he is going to be reborn again, it will no longer be the same person who is going to experience suffering as most likely he's going to forget his old self and memories. My thoughts on his reply is that to experience dukkha and whatever kind of self you are to be reborn as doesn't matter. Suffering is suffering. The new self is still going to experience it both internally and externally. However, I'm not satisfied with my answer and hope Lumpur can kindly clarify it. Well, I think that's quite true, isn't it? Suffering is suffering, whether it's now or in the future. And you don't want to be laying the causes and the grounds for future suffering, so that's why we work on abandoning the causes of suffering right now, in this very moment, cultivating the factors of the path, sila, samadhi, panya, to give us the means to learn to identify the causes of suffering, ignorance, craving, attachment, which are very subtle things going on in the mind, affecting the mind. We need to work hard to recognize and identify craving and attachment and the underlying ignorance that conditions them, and then we have to abandon them. And that's very challenging work, but very satisfying if you can ever recognize a bit of craving and abandon it. It's very satisfying and brings you happiness, brings you some immediate relief, immediate good karma in your mind, in your experience. And of course, if you are working at the path, the Buddhist explanation would be, well, if you're cultivating the path this life, but you haven't reached the end of suffering, nibbana, you are still subject to birth at the end of your life, so the consciousness is reborn somewhere else. Well, all that effort you put into reducing the mental defilements, the craving, the attachment that underlies your suffering in this life is not wasted. It's not like you go back to zero and start again. Next life you've got a store of good karma, good qualities. The effort you've previously put into your practice will re-emerge to support you in your future practice, to help you end suffering in the future as well. You haven't reached there yet, but the causes and conditions that you're developing in this life through your practice will be supportive of further practice in future lives. So it's almost like being too clever, I guess, when you say, well, the person who dies this life, we say a person is divided into the 5 khandhas, the 5 aggregates or groups: body, feeling, memory, thought formations, sense consciousness. People will say, well, this lot dies, breaks apart, disappears, so what arises in the next life will be a fresh lot. Therefore, it's not the same person, the same self. Well, on the highest level, the deepest level, that's true, of course. But the whole point of the Buddhist path is that if we are still creating the causes for suffering and experiencing the results of that, still suffering, that's a cycle, and it just goes on and on and on until we begin practicing to abandon craving and attachment that feeds that cycle of endless suffering. So you've got to start it. Whether you start it this life, next, sooner or later you've got to start practicing to abandon attachments. See attachment and abandon it. The sooner you start doing that, the better, because you're undermining or chipping away, eroding away the mental defilements rooted in greed, anger, delusion. So you're reducing the causes for future suffering, future birth, future suffering. From now, from day one, right here, right now. So it only makes sense, it's common sense just to start practicing now. But how long the whole process of practice will take from now until the mind is completely cured, purified of greed, anger and delusion, until consciousness is purified, it's peaceful, it's without defilement. Well, how long that will take depends. But you might as well start now and just keep going until the job is done. And so if you die from this life, you might aspire to be reborn again as a human and to meet with the Buddhist teachings so you can carry on that practice. That might be a wise aspiration to have at the end of your life if you're fairly sure you're still subject to the process of rebirth, you have attachments, defilements, well, you could consider that. So on the ultimate sense, you don't have to wait until next life. You're not the person you were yesterday already. Things are changing, aren't they, very fast. Your mental states change, feelings and sensations in your body and mind change all the time. The body is constantly changing, turning over, so the cells that are in your body today, they're not the cells that were in your body a few years ago. Everything's changed, even though you sort of have, there's a continuity and you still look more or less the same as a few years ago. You're not exactly the same because all the cells have been born and dying over and over again. Same with your mental states, your feelings, memories, emotions, you're constantly changing. So within one lifetime you can already observe how you're not the person you were before and you won't be the person you are now in the future, assuming you don't die. So, in Buddhism we do work on these two levels. There's the ultimate level that everything is not self, everything goes according to causes and conditions. But for practical purposes and ease of communication, we have the idea there is a person who makes good and bad karma, who practices the Dhamma. We still use the concept of a person or a being because it's convenient. But on that ultimate level, there's no person now or in the future. Bit of a tricky one sometimes. Next question. Why should I not kill insects that eat my veggie patch? Aren't they harming me? Poor insects, they don't know who they're dealing with, do they? Somebody's obviously very attached to their veggie patch and is not going to let a single insect eat anything. That's what attachment does, isn't it? You have a veggie patch or a fruit tree, the more attached you are, the more concerned you'll be about pests and things that come and eat your fruit or your veggies. What was it? Ajahn Chah said, you attach to one mango tree with all those mangoes and you're laying the grounds to become a little maggot. Because in Thailand the mangoes easily get the insects, the flies and things, the fruit flies, they drill into the mangoes and they lay eggs, and then if the mango is ripe and it hasn't been picked, then you'll find you get maggots into the mangoes. So he said, if you're attaching to this mango tree and the mangoes you're going to get from it too much, be warned, because you're laying the grounds to be reborn as a little maggot. Because then you're as close as you can get to those mangoes. So similarly, you love your veggie patch so much, you'll be warned you might end up as a snail or something crawling around your veggie patch. That's what attachment does. It makes it cling, stick onto things. And then through that sense of possession and protectiveness, well, then you see other insects or creatures as a threat, a pest, something to be got rid of, and so people can become quite cruel. But they'll justify it. They say, well, my veggie patch, I want to grow veggies so I can eat them or sell them. And they have their reasons, justifications for becoming a mass murderer of insects, perhaps. But we have to be honest. We're aiming for clarity in Buddhism, not to hide from the truth. So if you're in the unfortunate situation, you're in farming or market gardening industry and you have to spray for insects or pests, well, number one, try and be aware of what you're doing. If there's any way you can reduce the amount of killing choosing alternative products, alternative methods, that might be good. But at the very least, recognize the karma you're making, killing all these animals. That's a step up already. And maybe you feel uncomfortable about it, and that may lead you on later to completely take a new approach and stop killing pests. One thing I would recommend is spread metta to animals, including insects, especially if you know you're killing them or possibly killing them through your actions. Well, spread metta to them. Bring up this compassion, and that might modify your thinking. You become more sensitive, more kind towards even small creatures. As far as harming you, well, they're not eating you, they're eating vegetables, and they don't know those vegetables have somebody owning them. They don't think like that, do they? Animals are just out there in nature. They meet the tomato, they eat the tomato, they're not thinking, who does this belong to? If it's a human, okay, that's different. If someone comes to steal your veggies, which does happen, doesn't it? You might be more upset. But insects, they don't know any better. They're just eating food that they meet in the course of their day. So actually you can feel really sorry for them. They're just going about their business as an insect, eating whatever's there. They don't wish you harm, they're just trying to eat, which may indirectly be affecting you, of course, but they don't have the intention to harm you directly. So probably if you drop dead in your garden, your veggie patch, probably the insects will start eating you sooner enough. You could do it as dana for them. You donate your body to the insects, which we do. If someone's buried, then you just become food for worms and insects, don't you? They just do their thing. So I would encourage as much compassion, empathy for the insects of the world. They have enough predators already without us, and lots of birds and things out to kill them anyway. Greetings, Ajahn. What is the eye of Dhamma? Thank you. The eye of Dhamma, Dhamma Chaksu. You could say it's another word for wisdom, panya, or insight, clear seeing the nature of things. So we say, like Venerable Kalyano on the night or the day that the Buddha gave his first teaching, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, they say the eye of Dhamma opened for Venerable Kalyano, meaning he saw things without so much delusion. He wasn't fully enlightened, he became a stream enterer, but he understood that there is no such thing as a solid, lasting entity you can call a self, a personality, a being. That we are an amalgamation, a combination of different conditioned things, physical and mental, the aggregates. But these aggregates do not belong to a self, they're not a self. They arise, they pass away due to causes and conditions. So he had this very clear insight that whatever is subject to arising is subject to cessation. What is it that sees that? Well, it's just the mind, the well-trained mind, having developed strong mindfulness and samadhi, backed by strong sila, purity of sila, morality, then hearing the Dhamma very quickly, his right view arises and he understands suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, the practice leading to the cessation of suffering. He understands those Four Noble Truths, what he has to do in relation to the Four Noble Truths, and develops insight, strong, clear insight into impermanence. The Dhamma eye. So the Dhamma eye is when you see or view things as Dhamma, as truth, rather than from the place of delusion, beliefs, wrong views, deluded views, which we're doing, the unenlightened person is doing all the time. and then suffering for it. The Dhamma eye is looking at experience, the body, the mind, from the point of view of freeing the mind from suffering and the causes of suffering. So it's clear seeing. So you could say it's a better eye than your ordinary eyes. But it's internal, so you can't see it as like a physical eye. So it's developing right view to the point where it's established, so you're no longer viewing things from a deluded way. So the one who's developed the Dhamma eye, and say the Sotapanna, they understand karma, cause and effect, good karma, bad karma. They understand that ignorance, craving, attachment that cause suffering, dukkha, are to be abandoned. So whenever those are arising in their experience, craving, attachment arises wherever it's seen, they'll be abandoning it, cultivating the opposite, mindfulness, insight, effort, and then abandoning the causes of suffering. They'll be doing that very well because they have the Dhamma eye now, they're no longer deluded. Because the unenlightened person may sometimes do it well and sometimes get it all wrong and therefore suffer. That's why we suffer, because the Dhamma eye is kind of on the blink. Sometimes it's working, sometimes not. Sometimes it's closed, sometimes it's covered over by other stuff. So last question today. Ajahn, you stayed with Lumpur Buddhadasa for some time, and you mentioned that Lumpur taught in great detail about the process of dependent arising. I wonder, could you please share what you have heard from him? Well, you're right. You might call that Lumpur Buddhadasa's favourite topic for Dhamma discussion, Dhamma talks, even just casual discussions. He would introduce it, especially with monks who usually have some background, having read suttas and know a lot of the terminology, the Pali. He liked to give his Dhamma talks on dependent origination first thing in the morning, like 5 a.m. at dawn. So you go to his kuti and he would be giving a talk as the sun came up and the cocks were crowing and the world was waking up. He'd be talking about dependent arising. Sometimes they say dependent co-arising, the way that physical or mental phenomena arise and affect each other all the time, give rise. One thing gives rise to another. This is the natural way of things. So it's particularly a teaching for helping us understand how we end up being born as human beings, why we're here, but also how suffering arises. All the different kinds of mental suffering. Physical suffering, mental suffering, despair, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, despair, as we chant. Where does it all come from? Well, this is the teaching on dependent arising. And he would love to talk at this at length, sometimes just going through the 12 links, so beginning with ignorance, conditions, karmic formations, consciousness, name and form or nama rupa, the 6 sense bases, the contact that arises from the sense bases, feeling, vedana, craving, tanha, upadana, clinging or attachment, bhava, existence, and birth, jati. So he would talk about this in 2 ways. The traditional way is to talk about, we say 3 lifetimes. He would say, well, Where does ignorance come from? Well, you've already developed, in previous lifetimes, developed ignorance by following craving and attachment, not recognizing it as the source of suffering. So you've built up the conditioning process or dependent arising process from last life. It's already in place. So you arrive in this life and you have ignorance, conditioning, karmic formations already. You're born because of your karma. As soon as you're alive, you're receiving more karma. You see things, hear things, taste things. This is all your karma coming back to you, good and bad. Your different experiences that you have. So he'd go into that and say, well, this is explaining where it all comes from, previous lives, and then if the business is not finished, when you die, well, it'll be causing the arising of consciousness in a future life. But more often he would say, just observe paticca samubpada, or dependent origination, dependent arising at work, right here, right now. Because any thought or discussion about a past life or a future life tends to be more theoretical, abstract, because you haven't reached your next life, and your past life you can't remember. So you would say more important is understanding dependent origination this life, as it's happening right now, because it's a cycle of experience. It's going on all the time. It's going on right now as you listen to me. If you're listening, you pay attention to the words. That gives rise to sense contact. This is already karma, the fact that you've chosen to listen to a Dhamma talk, that you're in a position where you can hear the talk, you've got healthy ears, consciousness picks up the sound, interprets the sound, and if you have faith in the Dhamma, or you're interested, maybe you get some mild pleasure perhaps. Occasionally we get strong rapture from listening to Dhamma. Probably got some interest because you want to hear the words and understand, and you're happy to do that, so it might give you some mild, subtle pleasure to listen. Or if you're very tired, perhaps listening to a Dhamma talk is not what you want. You just want to go and rest or do something else. Or if you've got a painful body in some respect, you're experiencing pain, you may not want to listen to Dhamma, and the thought of listening to Dhamma is not a pleasurable one. So when you hear the Dhamma teaching, you say, oh, I don't want this, and you have unpleasant feeling arise. The important thing is it's dependently arisen. You have eyes, there is something, and you have ears. You have ears, something to hear, sound of the teaching. And then with that sense contact, it stimulates pleasant or unpleasant feeling or neutral feeling. If there's no mindfulness presence, craving arises. With feeling, dependent on feeling, craving arises. We like something or we don't like something. We're interested and attracted to something or we're not. Or we want to get rid of it. Or we're dull. Indifferent feeling, neutral feeling tends to stimulate dullness. This is dependent co-arising at work in the present moment. It's happening right here, right now for all of us. Whether you're mindful and aware of the whole thing or not, that's a different question. That comes in with practice. How do we practice towards dependent arising? Well, we cultivate the path, sila, samadhi, panya, mindfulness, insight, and we keep bringing that insight to bear on our experience from moment to moment, and then you might become aware of how experience is dependently arisen. If you turn off your device and stop listening, then this sound will stop. You'll get a new experience, but the previously arisen feeling of pleasure or pain associated with the sound of my voice will stop. If you go away, or if I stop speaking. And you imagine that's going on all the time, all through your day with all your six senses. It's endless, it really is endless, and it's a cycle. We chase pleasure, pleasurable feeling, we run away from and distract ourselves from pain. So this is craving that leads to this movement of the mind, which often leads to speech and action as well. And because it's repetitive and cyclical, you get caught into habits or patterns of behavior which become clinging. So craving is a condition for clinging to arise, attachment or upadana. In one way or another in your experience, it's constantly being reinforced. So Ajahn Buddhadasa loved dogs. He was very kind to many dogs, and he had lots of stray dogs in his monastery, but he would feed them, stroke them, look after them, tolerate them. So he's often bringing dog similes in when he'd talk about things like dependent arising. So he'd say, craving arising, you see something you like, stimulating craving. This is like the dog barking. You really get stuck into that thing you like. It becomes ingrained into your consciousness that you like this sight or this person or this sound or this taste. It becomes part of who you are, your personality, you might say. Then it becomes a clinging, an attachment, and it's just automatic. And he said the dog is no longer barking, now it's biting. Biting is stronger than barking, isn't it? It hurts. He used to say, this process of dependent arising, the step-by-step arising of, say, an experience of suffering, trying to cling to something that you like, clinging to not liking, disliking. It's like you're being chased by this dog all the time, and that's craving arising all the time. I want this, I don't want that, dog barking. And then your mind takes hold, grasps it, and that's like dog biting. It's been chasing you and now it's bitten you. So he used similes like that. Incidentally, you'd say when it's craving in the form of vipavadanha, craving not to become, craving dislike, not wanting. So he says, say somebody insults you, use insulting words, and you hear them, and it stimulates, gives rise to craving of vipavadanha, not wanting, not liking. This is arisen dependently based on having ears, something to hear, and in this case something unpleasant words. He says that they're like a dog barking at you, criticizing you, insulting you. He says, if at that moment you're not mindful, you give in to your craving, what happens? Well, you'll probably speak something back to them or shout something back. They insult you, maybe you'll argue, insult them, or say something back. He said, if you give in to that craving, then another dog has arisen in the world. All you're doing is adding to the number of dogs in the world. If a dog is barking at you, don't bark back. Meaning if someone's insulting you, don't insult them back, just be patient. So patience is an important quality for understanding and dealing with paticca samuppada, dependent arising, because you need to be patient with all this craving and attachment. You need to be mindful, so patience and mindfulness work together. You need effort. Then you need the insight to see craving is impermanent, it's dukkha, cause of dukkha, and it's not self. If you can have enough mindfulness and enough reflective ability of the mind to see craving is not self, you drop it, you stop it, you let it go. Why suffer? So if you can see craving as the cause of suffering, you let it go. So every time you see craving as the cause of suffering, every time you abandon it through the practice of mindfulness, wise reflection, you're reducing the causes for future birth. And this is the important thing of understanding paticca samuppada or dependent arising. You're undermining causes for becoming and birth, bhava and jati. And this is why the Buddha even put a number on it, saying, the Sotapanna, the extreme enterer, has penetrated dependent arising at least to the point where there's no more than 7 births. 7 more lives, because at least some insight into it is established in the mind. It's there. And the result is that the Sotapanna doesn't have nearly as much suffering as the ordinary unenlightened person. The Arahant has completely penetrated this whole cycle, and it's completely abandoned. It's no longer working. It's no longer spinning its cycle anymore. The Sotapanna, it's spinning, but a lot less. The unenlightened person, it's an unknown thing, isn't it? It could still be spinning many cycles per second. So this is how he would teach. He'd say, contemplate dependent arising every moment, because it's happening right here, right now. You don't have to wait till next life or think about last life. You can think about it in the short term as an immediate thing. And this was his encouragement to practice in this way. It's a useful way to use it as a tool for understanding your experience better. But he'd also put a condition on that. He'd say, most people, even if they've read the book or read the suttas, they've heard the discussion of dependent co-arising, and they understand the terms, is very fast. It's in a moment of consciousness. So they may not yet be able to actually abandon craving and attachment, even though they know the words and they understand that craving and attachment is the cause of suffering. They may not yet be able to do it. So you have to bear that in mind. Just learning the words is a good start, but it's not enough. You have to practice it too. It's very fast. So that's a little bit on the practice or the teaching of dependent arising, which the Buddha said is like the central core of what he was contemplating, leading up to his awakening experience, Nibbana. And Lumpur Buddhadasa, we believe, was an arahant, an enlightened teacher, and he would explain this at length. You might say his favourite topic. And he literally could sit there explaining it all day long. The enlightened mind is like that. He never gets bored of talking Dhamma. And everything he would talk about, he would turn into Dhamma very well, very successfully. It's the opposite of the unenlightened mind, which likes to turn even the Dhamma into something very worldly. Goes off in a different direction. That's the difference between the enlightened person and the unenlightened person. The unenlightened person brings everything down to the level of self, craving, attachment, suffering. The enlightened person brings everything out of that to understanding things on the highest level as just dependently arisen. There's no self involved in this person. Our thoughts, our feelings, our experience, the things of this world are all dependently arisen. So Lumpur Buddhadasa would go into that at length almost every day. He could literally talk about it day after day. Very happy to. And we were very happy and very lucky to have heard him, because he had a very clear way of talking about it and very clear voice, but also just clear explanation. He was very enthusiastic to teach it. So I'll leave you with those answers tonight and wish you well in your practice.